It's like the consciousness heated up, and it was like popcorn popping all over the world. It's
Mm-hmm.
like people um, uh, started saying that system doesn't work, and I
Yeah.
can't work inside of it.
Welcome back to the Thriving Lawyers Podcast. In this week's episode, join Michael Kahn for a wide-ranging discussion with J. Kim Wright, integrative lawyer, author, innovator, and systems change agent.
What would you say? What keeps you going, Kim? Are you seeing? I know you love it, so that's probably the main thing that keeps you going. You said I don't know if it was before we started or during the interview now, but you said you wouldn't do it if you didn't love it, which I think is wonderful. I mean that's the way to be, and I'm certainly. I think I've done a decent job in that regard. I've got some tweaking to do, I think, still in my 62nd year that's coming up. Uh,
Oh, you're
but
just a
for
young
you, what?
fella, so you got time.
I do. Uh, so what keeps you going other than loving it? Are you seeing some progress? Are you seeing some concrete concrete impact of this movement?
I am. Um, so one of the things is that I'm just really like fanatic about purpose,
Yes. You
and
mean
as long
individual purpose,
my purpose and really
your purpose.
aligning with my purpose, and
Yes.
that's very energizing.
And what is your purpose? How would you define that?
I'm actually in a restating um,
Okay.
time,
Yeah.
but I would say that it's to the short way is talking about the transformation of the legal profession, of the legal
Hmm.
system, that we are
Hmm.
building the legal system for the world that is evolving.
Hmm. Okay. So what are you seeing?
So, just to give a measure, in
Yeah.
2002, I went to a conference um, for an international legal group. And there were some speakers up on the podium, and I knew one of them, so I sat up front. And they had 8 people at each table, and most of us didn't know each other. So, as they do, they said, "Everybody, introduce yourself." And they had a icebreaker question, and I introduced myself as being a lawyer who was a peacemaker and a healer. And 7 people suddenly saw someone across the room that they had to go sit with.
No. People left your table.
Left my table, left me.
Everybody left, leaving you there by
Everybody left.
yourself?
I was sitting up front,
Wow.
in front of the podium.
Oh my gosh.
It's middle school hell.
This was 20 years ago, 2002?
Yes,
Is that what you
20 years
said?
ago. And
Wow.
and then
Okay.
and so that's sort of one marker.
Right.
Then the ABA asked me to write a book.
Hmm.
And so that was 8 years later
Right.
that the book came out. It was actually I was named a legal rebel in 2009 and asked to write the book. In 2010, the book came out. And so that actually shows huge progress.
Hmm.
And then I think the most exciting progress I'm seeing now is that there are
Yeah.
so many people who are doing this work that I don't actually know, and that don't know that there's a movement. Like
Right. They're in the middle of it.
they're in the middle of it, and they've been courageous enough, and they've gotten a whiff of something happening, like and it's not as scary as it used to be. Yeah,
So would you say the movement is mostly defined by collaborative law, or it's bigger than that?
oh, it's
Like
much bigger than that.
much bigger than that?
It it's like the consciousness heated up, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like popcorn popping all over the world. It's
Mm-hmm.
like people started saying that system doesn't work, and I
Yeah.
can't work inside of it, and therefore
Right.
I have to create something new. And so Stu Webb, who created collaborative law, was one of
Yeah.
those early people, one of those early pioneers. But then restorative justice and therapeutic jurisprudence and creative problem solving, those were also people who said the other one's not working. What am I going to do? So
Yeah.
the models
Right.
were the first symptom, but now we have
Yeah.
people who are, like I remember the first time I met somebody who was both a yogi and a lawyer, and it was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen, and I was the weirdest lawyer in town. Um, when I tell the story, I actually think of my dear friends who live in Hawaii now, who are a couple who use yoga in their law practice,
Oh wow. And
and so
I have to stop you. How does that look? How
that
do they
well,
use yoga in their law
because yoga
practice?
is about energy and
Yeah.
about the shift in energy, and
Okay.
conflict is a type of energy,
Hmm.
and so their work and energy helps them shift conflict, and
Hmm.
so they've integrated who they are and what they care about and the consciousness work
Hmm.
they've done with the
Hmm.
legal system in a way that works for them, that is not what they
Yeah.
learned in law school.
Yeah.
And that pattern, I see it over and over and over again, of people saying, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to create this other thing. I probably know 100 people who've created holistic law. Like,
Okay. So
like,
that's a sign of. So
yeah,
would you say that one of the ways to define what you're describing, like you're the weird lawyer and these other lawyers are bringing yoga into their practice, that people are bringing their authentic selves to the practice of law and not being limited by the cookie cutter approach that you were felt limited to coming out of law school in the
yes.
90s, and even now, of course, but less so now, a little less so now because of that.
Yeah, I think authenticity is one of the important values of the integrative law movement.
Okay.
And that's what we call it. After Peacemakers came out, we actually had a group of us who were leaders in different areas. Got together and said, "This thing needs a name. Like we know we're doing something together, but we don't have a name." And by consensus, we chose the name Integrative Law.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
didn't name it; it was named by the community.
Hmm.
And so since 2011, that's what we've called it. But it helps us to integrate like our authentic self with the
Yeah.
law,
Right.
bring in some other values. So it's another piece of what it means to be an integrative lawyer, is sort of reflecting on who I am and what I'm here for, and how is the law working or not.
Right. Doing like what you're talking about, coming up with a purpose, with
Yeah.
even maybe a not a corporate in a corporate way, but a mission statement or a
Yes.
vision statement. Right.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I do with my
Okay.
clients. And and
Mm.
and in the conscious contracts movement, I was trained as a coach 30 years ago, and so we bring in that idea that like, who are you really? And if you could practice law in any way that expressed that, what it would look like.
Hmm.
And so
Great question.
lots and lots of
So
people
say
are.
that again. Say that question again. I want listeners to hear that. Who are you? Say what was the question?
I'm
Who are
not
you
sure
really?
exactly how I said it then, but uh,
I think it was
what I
like, who are
sometimes,
you really?
who are
Right.
you really?
Hmm.
And how can you bring that to the law? And how
There you
can
go.
you shape your law practice?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like
Now the
who?
challenge, I would imagine, Kim, is the first thing that occurred to me in my head is money.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're talking to that there might be people out there, many people out there, lawyers who want to change things. They've got kids, they've got a mortgage, they've got obviously whatever bills to pay, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and there's this excitement about what you're talking about, but how am I going to do that? I can't. That's scary. I'm going to be a weird lawyer, and how do I know I'm going to bring in the money that I need to?
Um, well, it's like
How do you
anything
fight
else.
against that? Yeah,
It's like anything else. If you were to suddenly close one law practice and open a completely different practice, you would have a
yeah.
transition time. But I did I think it was for Peacemakers. I did a little survey of asking lawyers who'd made the shift, how it affected their income. and some said
Yeah.
it went up, and some said it went down, and some said it stayed the same, which is kind
Okay.
of what you expect if you're going to do something
Sure.
really different.
Sure. Sure.
There are a lot of people who are making a lot of money in this
Hmm.
because clients really love it, like especially in the conscious contracts work that I do. The conscious clients are looking for lawyers who will do a more conscious approach with them and understand that what we're doing here is we're doing something kind of unique and think about Silicon Valley startups and like they're trying to reinvent the world, and then there's this old
Yeah.
legal system that needs a bridge between it. And so
Right.
so I have a lot of people in my circles who are making a lot of money um, in the
So
in this
I'm
month.
curious. Yeah, I'm curious. Can you quickly, because there are so many questions I want to ask, can you quickly describe what conscious contracts means?
So
What does
conscious
that look like?
contracts, the conscious contracts process is about putting the relationship first. And so what we do is that we start with a conversation about who are you, like like if you and I are going into a contract, who are you and why do you want to do this? Like what is being expressed by this project for you? What are your
Hmm.
goals? How does this actually forward your mission in the world? And I share the same information about me. And then we
So two
measure
people
up
who are entering a contract together.
entering a
Okay.
contract.
Uh-huh.
And so that's all the part about being in love. If they're doing a startup, if they're
Yeah.
getting married, I
Yeah.
mean, if they're even going to rent a house from each other, there's this excitement at the beginning of the relationship. Let's capture what that is,
And your role as the lawyer is to make that happen.
make that happen. But then what
Hmm.
happens is they have that moment of, oh my gosh, like this is like this sacred, wonderful space, and how am I going to screw this up? Because I've
Hmm.
done that before. And so then we actually have a conversation about how we're going to address change when it comes up, and how are we going to resolve conflict when it comes up.
Right. Of
And we
course.
look at we look at
Anticipate that.
we look at how do we work, and like the one that's really easy to see is like you don't schedule with me at 8 in the morning because I'm still on the phone at 4 a.m. Like there's a um like there's certain working patterns of mine that if you're going to work closely with me, you need to understand. Well, we're going to talk about those, and we're going to put those in our contract as well, so that so we put all of that in, and then we look to see how do we actually put in all of the nuts and bolts. Like, what are the promises we need to make to each other to make the goal that we've set out actually
Right.
achievable? And that's what a conscious contract does. It's written in plain
Wow.
language. Sometimes we use a
Yes.
lot of visuals, whatever
Hmm.
matches the people.
Yeah.
And so that
And do you
model
have, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, that model is a really nice model for people who actually have a long-term relationship and expect to have a long-term relationship, rather than the adversarial model of you and I are enemies, and we've got to protect ourselves. We got to hold our
Hmm.
cards close to the chest.
Hmm.
It's a paradigm shift.
And your website is consciouscontracts.com.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And that's where folks, if they're interested in using that process, would reach out to you to make that
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
And if
We've got
any lawyers out there are curious about it, you can go to the website and check it out.
yeah. Yeah, we now have people who speak 20 languages or do business in 20 languages, not just speak. They do business in
Wow.
20 languages who are certified or have taken the basic training and are on their way to be certified in the model.
So, oh, okay. So you do training as well?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I did
And
one.
now you said that you surveyed lawyers to see what they were doing, how they were doing in the collaborative law process. Was part of your survey asking them how they were doing with well-being? On how
You know,
do you have any sense of that, and what kind of impact maybe it's made on lawyers who have made the shift?
so they were collaborative lawyers at that point, although now
Hmm.
integrative lawyers are in every area. But the
Okay.
survey had some open-ended questions where they talked about some of the trade-offs. And so I can tell you, like my one of my own stories. When I was doing litigation
Yeah.
in my early law practice, I had I think my overhead was something like $15,000 a month. Just before I had to make $15,000 a month before I could do anything, and this was in the '90s. So just you know, multiply that by however many
Yeah.
factor. Um, and when I stopped doing litigation and actually moved to a different city, my overhead was $500 a month,
Wow.
which meant that the quality of my life changed drastically.
Sure.
Like I mean, I had
So you didn't
office
need as
rent.
much staff, is that way, or
I
office
didn't need
rent?
staff, and I mean, I had a
Uh-huh.
small office, and yeah, it
Uh-huh.
was a lot of different things. Like I didn't need the big copier with the automatic feeds.
Right.
I had a
Right.
desktop copier.
Yeah.
All the things
Yeah.
that you have to do for litigation that are kind of just part of doing business went away.
Right.
And
Wow.
so I didn't have to make as much money, and that's actually what allowed me to start becoming a speaker and a trainer and all those things, 'cause
Mhm.
I didn't need to be there, for all the stuff that litigation required.
So do you do consulting, Kim? Like if
I do.
I'm thinking like if there's someone out there who's really intrigued by this and wants to do something different, wants to practice more authentically, um, how would they start? What kind of resources are out there, including are you a resource and
Yeah, I'm
what
totally a
else is out
resource for
there?
that.
Mm.
So the
Okay.
first thing would be to have a conversation with me, because I mean, I am a resource for that, but I'm also a resource for who else might be a better match. 'Cause,
Hmm.
I never
Hmm.
wanna take on somebody who's not a perfect client for me. Um,
Yeah.
I do it at a lot of different levels, so I work one-on-one with from law students to lawyers at the end of their career.
Hmm.
But I also like I've worked with the Basque government in Spain, and
Oh wow.
I've worked with there's several organizations there that were actually doing projects in the community to shift to a more collaborative um, community.
Hmm.
That included changing the legal system uh, to make that easier. So sort
Yeah.
of any level.
But you provide consulting, coaching, whatever you call it. But you also know others who are doing that.
Yeah.
How would they reach out to you? Where would they? How would they find you?
Um, they
Do you
can
want to
go to
give an
any.
email address or
Yeah,
what's the best way?
jkimwright@gmail.com is the easiest.
J Kim Wright, and that's Wright, WRIGHT.
Yeah,
J Kim Wright at gmail.com would be how to connect with her. And we have, and like I said, well, with the liner notes, we'll include all the other ways to find you, LinkedIn, etc. Right?
yeah,
Uh, I know I'm very conscious of your time, so I know we only have couple minutes left, Kim, and there's a million more things we could talk about. But is there anything in particular that I haven't asked you about this, or about a book, or about anything that you feel like would be important to include in the discussion?
I want to mention the trauma informed law book,
Please.
and so it it's coming out later, and I've had this amazing team. There are four of us who represent a very diverse group of women,
Yeah.
and then we've got contributions from around the world. And what I already knew, but I'm really struck by in the research we've done for this book, is how trauma is sort of the core issue in the legal profession. We're either avoiding it, or we're uh, dealing with people who are traumatized without having been trained. The system is designed to traumatize more, we've got built-in systemic trauma and racism and misogyny and all of that has been baked in for the last hundreds of years. So the book really aims to both show that and then show some ways that can be different. I think it's a paradigm shifting book, and so
And it's trauma on many levels. It sounds like you're talking about lawyers need to know how to deal with their clients
yes,
who are coming in with trauma, some kind of trauma. Lawyers need to know how the the stories that they're hearing, the pictures that they're seeing, the videos that they're seeing, how that could cause vicarious trauma or secondary traumatic stress, right? And then also talking about the system, particularly if you're a marginalized lawyer, if you're a lawyer for a marginalized group, if you're a female, if you're a lawyer of color, if you're an indigenous lawyer, how that can impact you. So it's coming at trauma from lots of different angles,
yeah,
right?
yeah. We actually had a philosopher contribute to the book. We've had psychologists contribute. We've had lawyers. We have judges.
Yeah,
So as we lawyers do, we wanted to look at it from as many angles as we could, and we only had 300 pages to do this. So uh,
yeah.
it's the beginning of a conversation.
And say the name of the book again.
Trauma Informed Law, a primer for practicing lawyers. It's being published by the Law
And you
Practice Management section.
and when's it coming out?
That's a very good question.
Estimated sometime this year.
Sometime this year.
Okay. And you've done one of your co-authors is it Myrna McCallum,
It is Myrna.
and she has a podcast
She does.
called is it called Trauma Informed
I
Law
think it's
or
called the
something
Trauma
like that?
Informed Lawyer,
Trauma Informed Lawyer,
and
which is very interesting. And she's an Indigenous Canadian
she is
lawyer.
an
Is that right?
Indigenous Canadian, and she's
And then
very
Helgi
prolific. Helgi
uh,
Mackey,
Mackey, yes,
who's a
Helgi
former
is in
corporate
Toronto.
lawyer who has really been studying the somatic perspective, and
Yeah.
Marjorie Florestal, who is a law professor, former tenured contracts professor,
Ah.
who went back to school and got her master's degree in psychology and is working on her PhD, really focused on lawyer well-being and law student well-being.
Well, that sounds like a great. I know Helgi. She was on a roundtable with me in a program I did for um, Osgood Law School. She's great, but it sounds wonderful. I definitely want to get a hold of that book. We do programs at Real Time on the impact on vicarious trauma, the impact of vicarious trauma on lawyers. So I'm very interested in that book. Um, so unfortunately, we're out of time. And
Yeah, we could talk
Kim, I'll
another
give you
week.
one last chance. We could. Anything else you want to say about how? Any last piece that you want to say before we wrap?
I'm also working on 3 other books. One focused on grief and what lawyers need to know about grief, that is being
Oh,
co-authored by several lawyers who are now experts at grief, some of them through circumstances not of
well,
their own choosing.
that's one of my areas of expertise as a therapist. So I'm very interested in that.
And then we also have lawyers as designers, which I'm doing with 2 Australian law professors and one from the
Hmm.
UK, where we're collecting examples of excellent design and art that's being used
Oh,
in the law.
Kim, you are just amazing in terms of. I'm sure you've heard it before. I don't know how you do it all, but you love it.
I love
And
it.
that's what fuels you. All this stuff you're doing, all the travel you're going to start doing again.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I'm going back on
when
the
you
road.
come through Vancouver, let me know.
I will. I will. We'll have a
Uh,
gathering of all the Vancouver people that I know that don't know each other.
that would be fantastic. It's so good to see you. I can actually see her, even though you can only hear her on the podcast. I can see her today, but it's great seeing you. And let's keep in touch.
All right. All right. Thanks,
All right.
Michael.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you everybody for listening. This podcast will probably be offered in 2 parts, so be sure and download both parts as they are dropped. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Thriving Lawyers Podcast. We love hearing from our loyal listeners, so please feel free to email us any questions, comments, suggested topics, or guest recommendations at the following address: feedback@thrivinglawyerspodcast.com. The Thriving Lawyers Podcast is brought to you by Real-Time Creative Learning Experiences, a national provider of continuing legal education and professional development programs that leave participants engaged, encouraged, and equipped to pursue meaningful and sustainable change in their practices, their lives, and the organizations they work in. And by Osborne Conflict Resolution, your experienced guides through the uncharted terrain of business and family law disputes, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Thriving Lawyers Podcast.